One of the biggest misconceptions that I think that people have about me is that I am fearless. I have an expectation that, quite frankly, often I will be afraid, but that doesn't matter. My lived experience as a gay man has been against the backdrop of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And, friends started to get sick and kind of disappear. We didn't have a choice, that this thing was coming at us and we had to fight back.
Being at Cathedral High School is so entrenched in my development and who I was. I went through a lot of issues there, like being harassed for being gay or queer. But at the same time, it's also where I got a sense of my own worth, self-esteem, and my introduction into social advocacy and activism. It was the Christian Brothers who were, in 1970, were getting involved with La Huelga and the grape and lettuce boycott for Cesar Chavez and the farm workers. And they recruited me if I wanted to be a volunteer. And I said, yes, absolutely. I thought it was the right thing to do.
It's been about, 15 years or so since I've transitioned, and I'm still here. I can tell you right now, nobody has tried to kill me yet. Believe me, I'm quite aware of what happens to transgender women of color in this world and in this country. I was perfectly satisfied to just, if somebody's gonna have to blow me away because I've got to be myself, then, fine. I'll live with that, I'll die with that. Because at least I would have been true to myself for at least as long as I get.
For me, being unapologetically Black means that we attempt to center everything we do from the perspective and lived experience of Black people, and to understand that our experience has value, and that any effort to end the AIDS epidemic among Black people have to engage Black people.
I recognized that the world and my place in it as a Chicano is definitely a political stance that I needed to continue with and embrace. I knew that I was gay, and that this emphasis within the Chicano power movement on La Familia as a theme excluded LGBTQ. I recognized right away that it wasn't just enough to, proclaim myself as a gay Chicano, that we had our own issues that we needed to deal with within our culture.
The organizing I've done has always been coalition organizing, and understanding the interests of other people and trying to put yourself in their shoes, and having some understanding of the life that a person lives that brings them to this point of view in this time, in this place, and in this confrontation, this conversation. Once we can do that on a large scale, I believe that we can do things together that can actually benefit all of us and benefit the larger society, which again, I say is the entire objective, is to move all of us forward in some way.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
How are we doing? Pretty good. I'm Rob Schwenker. I'm the executive director of the Santa Monica History Museum, where we are gathered this evening. Who's been to this place before? A few people. Wonderful. To everybody else, welcome. This is why we do this. We want to bring you into to this space and have you discover it. Right now we are currently presenting this exhibition that we're all surrounded by, which is called Coming Out West, LGBTQ Elders Share Their Stories. It was just a pleasure to work with the team at Outwords to put together this exhibition, which is, as you can see, almost entirely presented in video. You can walk up to those walls when those screens are on, and you can hear the folks featured on those panels tell you their stories. And in the center of the room, you'll find a bunch of archival material, some provided by the One Archive, which we are grateful for, that supports and puts all of this into the context of LGBTQ plus history. And so it's been a wonderful collaboration, an amazing exhibition, And I think that the most interesting way to experience history is through the eyes of those who lived it. And the most powerful stories that we have, the ones that we share with one another, are the ones that we should be lifting up. And so I hope that what we did with this exhibition was lift up these stories and more broadly, give some context to LGBTQ history. So I hope that you enjoy this, and we're so honored to be able to host this panel here. I'd like to introduce the chair of the board of the One Institute, Chiedu Ubunyiwe, to tell you a little more.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you. Hi, and yes, I am Chiedu Ubunyiwe, the board chair for the One Institute, or One Institute as we are now referred to. And we are the host of Circa Queer Histories Festival. We are so pleased that you're here, of course, tonight. But I have to make a few announcements. First, of course, the land acknowledgement that we are grateful to the Tongva, Tatish, Viam, Chumash, and other indigenous peoples who made their homes around this unceded area that we now call Los Angeles. So we are grateful to our forebears. All right, so One Institute is celebrating its 70th anniversary by launching Circa, this wonderful month-long festival, the first of its kind, I think anywhere really. And so we are so we're dependent, of course, on our supporters like yourselves. So we encourage you to go to circafestival.org to find out more about some of the programming. We also encourage you to go to oneinstitute.org to learn more about our organization and our other programs, as well as, if you so choose, to click the donate page and make a donation or become a member if you haven't already. Because your support, of course, makes things like Circa possible. Also helping to make this possible are our supporters, California Humanities, California Arts Council, the Los Angeles Department of Arts and Culture, the 3rd District Supervisor, Lindsay Horvath in her office, the City of West Hollywood, and our broadcast sponsors, ABC7. So we're thankful to all of them. And again, thankful to all of you. Finally, I just want to say that we're really thrilled to be here tonight for Unapologetically Whole, Queer Elders of Color Speak Out, organized by Outwords, as well as, of course, the Santa Monica History Museum. And to speak to Outwords and this program, I want to introduce the founder and executive director of Outwords, Mason Funk.
It is such a pleasure to welcome you all here tonight. And I want to thank Rob and the entire staff here at Santa Monica History Museum for everything they did to enable Outwards to create our first ever museum exhibit here at the Santa Monica History Museum. And I also want to thank Chiedu and everyone at One Institute for the opportunity, first of all, for creating Circa, an incredible festival that is destined to have a long and prosperous life and support queer histories in the US and far beyond for many, many decades to come. So thank you to One Institute for that work. Outwords is the first and only national organization to dedicate itself specifically to recording the stories of LGBTQ plus elders across the United States and in a few cases even beyond. We started 7 years ago. To date, we've recorded around 300 interviews with queer elders in 42 states. And we've gone out of our way to make sure that this group of interviews is as diverse and inclusive as possible, whether that means racial, ethnic, cultural, geographical diversity, whatever kind of diversity you might be searching for. I have to say, in confidence and with a certain degree of pride, I believe it's included in Outwords. That doesn't mean that our work is finished. In fact, we're really just getting started. And this museum exhibit is a way to share our stories with a world that, honestly, I want to say thank you to the museum because we had never done this before, and we've seen how powerful it is to be able to bring people into an actual physical space where you can either watch something on a big screen or you can be in sort of a more private moment where you're listening to a story on a smaller screen with headphones. It's all part of building community, and that is essential to the Outwards mission. So I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to thank our panelists for participating. It's a remarkable group of people, and we have a remarkable moderator as well. So without further ado, I'm going to grab my phone because I want to be able to provide a proper introduction to our amazing moderator, and it is on my phone. Our moderator tonight is Liz Vazquez. Liz is a first-generation Mexican-American artist, writer, and filmmaker from Los Angeles. They received their BA in film production with a focus on cinematography at the Arts Institute of Bournemouth in the UK. In 2021, they became an artist in residence at the Philosophical Research Society, presenting their first solo show, Mano de Dios. In 2022, they graduated from the American Film Institute Conservatory with an MFA in screenwriting. They now manage social media, PR, and marketing for the Philosophical Research Society while continuing to work, of course, on their creative projects. Without further ado, please welcome Liz Vazquez.
Thank you so much. Oh, I think we got a little switcheroo. Well, thank you everyone for being here. This is my first time moderating, so please be patient with me. But truly, I mean, what an honor. Thank you, Mason. Thank you everyone involved for having me here. You know, I think for me, one of the things is I often didn't find mentorship when I needed it the most. And it was a thing of organizations like this, of finding stories and finding people that I connect with. And so tonight I'm very honored to introduce you to our panelists. I mean, I would want to give you their biographies, but they're so extensive that would take half an hour each. So I really hope through this conversation that we can get to know them and their backgrounds and their accomplishments. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mia Yamamoto, Joey Terrill, and Phill Wilson. Title of tonight's panel discussion, Unapologetically Whole. And Phill, you brought up about being unapologetically Black and what that means. And I think, you know, something that it feels it's really become much more of a circulated statement, especially with like young queer people, of like intersectionalism and intersectional identities. And I wonder, like, you know, this is for everyone, but just like being multiple marginalized identities and finding, you know, being unapologetic in one sense, but then maybe having struggled to incorporate the whole of our, you know, complex identities. And maybe just talking about like your journeys, not only obviously as a Black man in America, but a Black queer man in America, for example.
That's a great question. I think it is a great place to start. One of the things that I think is unfortunate is that claiming who you are can be misinterpreted to mean excluding or dismissing who other people are. And I actually don't think that that's true at all. I think that, quite frankly, the opposite is true, that the only way that you can really celebrate other people is to be comfortable with who you are, you know. And so I think that that is a critically important jumping off point for inclusivity, intersectionality, you know. And you're right, you know, we're often many things. You know, I'm a Black gay man living with AIDS. You know, I'm a man of a certain age. You know, I'm a parent. I'm an uncle. You know, I'm a son. You know, I'm all sorts of things. You know, and I bring all of them into every room I go into all the time.
That's beautifully put. And I think also, like you mentioned, it's something that is constantly shifting, but it's always there. And whether or not like something is more obvious or not, it's a matter of just, you know, leaning into, you know, who we are, like who our souls are, essentially. So we hope for everyone else to kind of speak about, again, their journeys of incorporating the whole, or, you know, feeling the sort of becoming whole in that sense. Mia, if you want to speak on that.
Everybody in this room struggles with being whole. Everybody struggles with incorporating every element of oneself, some of which we have had a tendency, or at least tried to abandon someplace down the line in the course of our development. So coming into any situation, whenever I talk to people, I feel like I do have to represent. I've always felt like when we first started off as the first Asian Americans in the courthouse, it was always like you had to represent. Being the first trans people in the courthouse was an even more minuscule minority, and there for the purpose of representing again. And always, when you are a minority of any kind of, in any kind of situation, you are charged with representing. If you are a mediocre lawyer, you have done a great disservice to your community, both the Asian community and the queer community, to make sure that you are forging a place for other people and making sure that you make room for other people is always on your agenda. Whenever you walk into wherever you're walking into, whatever court you've got, whatever venue, whatever jail, whatever office, you got to represent, you got to be able to show what we can do. That's always been the case as long as we've been out any place in the world. So I hear that today's coming out day, right? I recommend that for everybody, but every place too. And in every situation, in your home, in your work, in your community, but all that, let me just say that you represent a lot of communities when you come out and when you go out and you work wherever you're gonna work. People are going to judge your community by you, no question about it, especially when you're one of the few ones and the first ones there. And it sucks to be the first one. I'll tell you that. I'd rather be the fourth or fifth one. You know what I mean? Because you get a lot more attention than you really, really wanted. And when you're the first one, there's really no role models or roadmaps. And so there's a lot of struggle that comes along with that. A lot of insecurity probably, but the main thing is I understand what is my charge, what's my duty, what's my responsibility for being out. Not just being out, but representing and making sure that we're forging a place for all queer people and all queer people of color.
Thank you.
Wow. Let me see if I can add something to that that's maybe more specific to my experience. I absolutely totally agree with everything that Mia and Phill has just said. So, as you probably saw there, as a Chicano growing up in East LA, I was very aware that I was gay, but I was also very aware that, and I'm talking like, like third and fourth grade. Okay. I mean, I was never in the closet, so to speak. And, but I also knew that it was something I had to keep secret. I had to keep, down, especially within the, Mexican-American, Chicano, mostly Catholic community. It was very frowned upon. And I remember having an epiphany one day. I used to be a good Catholic student, and I would go to church. Nobody had to tell me. I would go and celebrate Mass. And it was one day, I think I was 11, where it's the first time that I heard the priest in a sermon talk about homosexuals and that they were evil and demonic and horrible. And I sat there, and it was like the stereotypical light bulb going off in my head, like, what? Oh man, he is so fucking wrong because he's talking about me. And I know I'm the best little Catholic boy that could be. And I say my prayers and I go to church and I take communion and I take care of my mom and I take care of my sister and I'm part of a family. And how dare he think that? And I realize, if he's wrong about that, which I know in my heart he was, then what else was the church wrong about? What else was the government wrong about? I mean, it was a channel for me, an opening that made me start to critically think and reevaluate everything that I had been raised to believe in. And I was fortunate that I had that experience. In terms of embracing my gay identity, the way I worded it to someone when they questioned, why are you gay? How can you be this way? Blah, blah, blah. Back when I was younger, I said, you know what? I'm sorry, but my heart, my brain, it's the same brain, the same heart that I love my family. I love my mother. I love my father, my cousins, my sister. This same heart, I love men. I love boys. And even as a child, I didn't know about sex. That wasn't the issue. But I knew that little girls were very pretty. I mean, and I used to tell them how pretty they were. And but they were pretty to me like a vase of flowers was pretty. But little boys were like little puppy dogs. that I wanted to cuddle and hold. And that was from my earliest recognition of who I was, my identity. So that became the focus of my art. I'm an artist, for those that don't know. Anyway, I don't want to take up too much more, but I think...
That's fantastic. I mean, even within all that as well, I'd be interested in hearing for three of you, like, when was it that you officially came out, or was there like an official coming out? And, you know, Joe, you talked about having like, you know, this epiphany with, you know, sort of realizing your identity of like, what else can I question out there? And I think this comes out too with the idea that the personal is political, that being ourselves in the world is a statement. And it's always going to be brave to be who you are, to go back to the statement unapologetically whole. But, you know, was there a point for you when you're like, I have to do this? Or was it just kind of like you just swam with everyone? You know, how was it when you decided like, I'm going to proclaim officially who I am?
Well, my coming out experience, having spoken to other people, I think was kind of different than a lot of people, in that I didn't have that period of time where I was hiding. And I think that it was connected to the issue around race. You know, I'm 67, I was born in 1956. My parents were born in 1935. No, my parents were a part of the northern migration from the South. My mother migrated from Mississippi. My father migrated from Louisiana. They're both young and poor, to Chicago. And Chicago is probably was and maybe even still is one of the most balkanized cities in the country. And if you can imagine that in the 1930s, and they started a family. Mm-hmm. And they decided that there were a lot of things that they might not be able to give their children. But the one thing that they could give their children was an understanding that we were okay, that we were going to grow up in a world that we were going to receive messages that were going to tell us that we weren't okay, that our hair was the wrong texture, that our color was the wrong color, that our noses were too wide, you know, you name it. And my earliest memories were my parents basically repeating over and over and over and over again, you know, you are fine just as you are. You know? And also I grew up in the housing projects on the south side of Chicago where everybody was black. You know, the first time I met a live person who was not black was I was 4 or 5 years old. And my first reaction was, what happened to you? You know, because it didn't dawn on me that there was something wrong with me. And so, but because my parents had spent all of that time, you know, creating a world that their children could actually address racism, when I discovered that I was gay, the first person I told, because I was in a relationship at the time, the first person I told was my fiance. You know, and that was like immediate. Mm-hmm. And that was prior to having any sexual encounter with a man or anything. The second person I told was my mother. You know, and the third person I told was my father. You know, and my mother was like, you know, are you happy? And my position was it didn't dawn on me not to tell them. No, because they had delivered these messages. They didn't have any sort of accept that you're just fine the way you are, except it didn't dawn on them. I think that maybe had it dawned on them, they might have put caveats there. But now they had already done the damage. And so I went to my mother and her first reaction was, you know, well, actually her first reaction was, you know, did I do something? You know, and for reasons that I still don't understand today, I was like, this is not your story, okay? So this story is about me. It has nothing to do with what you did and did not do. And so she said, if you're happy, I'm happy, which is a theme that actually became important over the course of our lives. And she says, I think that that's fine, but don't tell your father. And so the next day I told my father. And my father was basically the same. My father said to me, well, if you have to do your own living, if you have to do your own dying, you might as well do your own living. And he said, but I'm the last one to know, aren't I? And I said, no, you're the second one to know. No, and actually he was the third one to know. But I said, I told Mom yesterday. And he said, and she told you not to tell me, didn't she? And I said, yes. And he said, well, that's disappointing. You know? He says, because this is information that I need to know, you know, because you're my son, you know, and I love you. And the only way that I can actually love you is to know you. You know? And so, you know, those lessons are lessons that were gifts that I've been grateful for my entire life.
Yeah. Probably the strongest, having that love and that support.
And the next person I told was our minister, because I come from a very, very religious family.
Wow.
And so I went to our minister and I told him, and our family is, I don't know how many people in here are familiar with Black Baptist churches and kind of the hierarchy of those churches. Well, as I look around, probably not many of you. But this may be true in other denominations as well. But in Black Baptist churches, there's the first family of the church is the minister. But then there's the other first family of the church, which is kind of the family that's really involved. They're usually a large family. That was our family, you know. And that family, there's a section in the church where they always sit. Nobody sits there, you know, except them and what have you. They are often on the trustee board and the nurses board and the ushers board and the choir and what have you. That was my family. Mm-hmm. And so the next person I told was our minister. And he was actually fine. And there are reasons that I could go into later about why he was fine, but that's another story as well. But he said, be careful who you tell. And this is probably the most important part of that particular story, because I wish this for everyone, actually. And he said, because people will use that information to hurt you. And I said to him, my mom and my dad already know, so nobody else really matters. And so, you know, I think that one of the benefits of coming out is that as queer people, you know, we want our families to love us, but they can't love us unless they know us.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, I know for you it's been kind of later journey, right?
Yeah, I came out very specifically on my 60th birthday. I was playing a gig. I remember I'm playing guitar, I got a microphone, and all of a sudden all the people at the place decided they're going to give me a surprise birthday party. And all these people are talking about what a great, cool dude. And I'm thinking, how would you feel if I kill that dude? Wow. And I remember thinking right at that moment that I spent a lifetime in feeling shame for being who I was, being trans, because I started up from 5 or 6, you figure out you have no question in your mind what you are. It's not something like you're confused like everybody seems to say. So I started coming out to people, started coming out to everybody at the party. Couldn't even convince them it was true. Most of them thought I was, because I kid around a lot. So people had trouble taking me seriously. But let me just say, you come out to people, and coming out is an extraordinarily difficult process, particularly because coming out as a gay or lesbian person, you're probably going to look the same tomorrow. When you come out trans, it's a real in-your-face transition. You don't look the same as yesterday. You had a tie and a piece suit today. You're coming to court in a dress and heels. And so coming to court for the first time, there had never been a transgender trial lawyer any place, certainly not in California, and maybe not even in the world. So there was really no role models or roadmaps, like I said earlier. So you got to forge your own path, and there's a lot of eyes popping, a lot of jaws dropping. People had seen me for 20, 30 years as a trial lawyer in those same very public courts. And my attitude, I'm going to liberate the criminal courts building. I'm going to force them to experience something that they'll never be able to unsee. And it'll change. It'll change the way they have to perceive the world and the courthouse and everything else. And then tomorrow, I'm going to liberate the jail. I'm going to liberate the police department. I'm going to liberate the DA's office. At every point along the line, I felt like I can do this thing and it's going to do some good. It's going to blow some minds, and probably that's good too. But it had to be done by somebody, and I didn't really want it to be me. I waited a long time, thought I was going to croak before I ever had to do this. Went in the military, didn't really expect to come back from Vietnam. A whole lot of ways in which I was looking for an honorable exit from this life. And I realized on that 60th birthday that to be false, to be dishonest about who you were and who you are, is far more shameful than hiding something that is your truth. So coming out was the most logical thing, because over the course of my lifetime, there's two kinds of people I really don't like. I don't like cowards. I don't like phonies. And I was both. And I felt like at that moment, I had to overturn that perception and that view and that phony, fake, dishonest view. And I started coming out. I had the microphone, like I have now. But the main thing is this. I think that it does liberate not just you, but the world and the places around you and the workplaces and every place else. And the whole point is to show them what we do. And I'm going to say something that a lot of people are not going to really like. But when we came across the courts, it was always like, we're going to show the white boys what we could do. Because we're not there now, and they're all over the place. And they're looking at us, and they're probably expecting us to fail. So we had to be really on our A game every single day, because there are whole communities counting on us. People of color, queer people. If we don't do a great job, fantastic job, memorable, admirable, notable job, then every single person that comes after us has been shortchanged by your opportunity that you wasted, that you squandered. So I came out to everybody, came out to my clients, was just a little bit more, because they were the next important after my family. I will say this, most of my family was pretty cool. I might say, I got one brother who is like the family bigot. And he said, "You're gonna do what? You're gonna cut off your whatever." They always say that. It's really weird for these people. You know what I mean? And so that's like really a big deal. He said, "Look, I'm not your brother. I'm not your family anymore. You keep away from me. You never call me. Keep away from my family, my kids." And I told him, "Look," his name was Greg. "If this is the last time I'm ever going to talk to you, I want to thank you. You were the rebel of the family. You were the one that taught me. I didn't have to be what everybody wanted me to be. Thank you. Goodbye." I haven't spoken to him in 20 years. Wow. But he's like that. You know what I mean? He can hold a grudge. I don't even know if that's a really good skill to have. But the main thing is this: my clients were great. I came out to every single one of them individually. I had people who were facing the death penalty. I had 5 murder cases. The clients, a lot of them were people from gangs. And a lot of the gangs have these codes. You can't be a gay person, whatever. Every single one of my clients was almost without hesitation say, "No, I want to stick with you." Or they would say things like, "Why would I want somebody else besides you?" And someone would say something like, I said, "Well, I didn't hire you for your, I hired you for your brain. I hired you for your brain, bro." You know what I mean? So they were real good. I have to say they were real understanding. I felt so touched by the fact that not a single one of them turned their back on me. I told them, I said, "Look, I could understand how you wouldn't want to stick with me. It's kind of this is not something that you ever expected or that I laid on you. And I know some of the best lawyers in LA, and you will be well taken care of. I guarantee you, no matter what. If you can't handle it, I'm down with that. I understand." Every single one of them. Anyways, ultimately came out to the prosecutors and the judges, none of whom ever responded. Some of them because of cowardice. Most of them because, judges, they don't want to commit themselves to anything, right? They pretend nothing's wrong. It's like, those guys, the only one judge I had a death penalty case. And I said, "Look, Judge, if this is going to prejudice my client in any way, take me off the case. If my transition is going to make my client look any worse in the eyes of the jury or anybody else, take me off the case." And he said, "No, I read the article about you in the paper and blah, blah, blah." They had a front page feature in the Daily Journal, which is the daily lawyer paper. And he said, "The part where you said that She said, I read the article, I'm going to make it a part of the record. And I said, the part where you said that if you couldn't die as a woman, you'd feel like you never lived. And he started to tear up. This hanging judge at the criminal courts building. I mean, I'm serious. This guy used to have a gun under his robes. You could see it when he turned around. He has like this bump, it's a big old gun with the handle. And, let me just say, my wife is saying, you better roll this up. But anyways, that was just an example of the process. So coming out is a continual process. This coming out tonight, we're coming out in a sense, and it's always a matter of spreading your truth, liberating the world, and making sure that you just go ahead and go there, and don't feel like you got to be shy about it. So, okay, I'm gonna shut up.
It's amazing. Thank you, Mia.
Okay. No. So for me, coming out is incremental. I mean, you tell a friend, you tell a family member that you trust, you tell your parents, et cetera, et cetera. When I was in 6th grade, I had a good friend, and he's still a good friend of mine, and he's an actor. Not a famous actor, but a Latino actor he's on Breaking Bad. But anyway, he in 6th grade, we were walking home from school, and I told him, I said, you know what, Javier? I said, I think I'm a homosexual. And he was like, really? Why do you think that? I said, well, I looked it up in the dictionary. And yeah, I'm pretty sure. He goes, oh, really? Okay. He was from the very start. And maybe that really helped me because, like, okay, this is going to be easy. Well, when I was 15, I decided. So just a little context here. I was living with my mother and my sister. My sister and I were very close. In the family, we were called two peas in a pod. She was 4 years younger. I was the older brother. And I was also the man of the house. My father had moved away to Arizona, and I hadn't seen him for more than a few years. But my mother had a nervous breakdown, and she was hospitalized. She was diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic, but she was out and functioning and working for LA Unified School District. And but I was the one who monitored her medications, and I was more of a caregiver. But when I was 15, I said, I'm going to consciously and with intent, I'm going to tell my sister. And I waited till I thought it was a very appropriate time. I was frosting her birthday cake that I made for her. And I said, Linda, I want to tell you something. And she goes, it's okay, I already know. And I said, no, I'm serious. I want to tell you something. She goes, I already know. I was like, what? Like, Miss Know-It-All, you think you know, what is it that you think you know? She goes, you're gay. I was like, and of course, that made me love her even more. But she was very smart. She was very perceptive. And I said, so what do you think? She said, you're my brother. And that was the right answer. I had also planned to then tell my mother at a certain point. And I was involved with the gay youth groups at the Gay Community Services Center. I was involved with the gay youth group at MCC Church, Metropolitan Community Church. But so I was planning in my head how I was going to sit her down and tell her. Instead, it happened one day when she was kind of bawling me out for not cleaning up around the house. And of course, I was a angst-ridden teenager and had my shag haircut and whatever. And she was kind of yelling at me, you don't clean up your room, you don't do anything around here. And she said, and then the way you dress, she goes, granudo. She goes, you look awful. She goes, you look like a queer. Is that what you want me to tell people? And I said, yes. I said, because I am. And the minute I said it, I wish I could have taken the words back. The look on her face, it jolted her, it hit her hard. And she sat down and the tears just started, streaming from her face. And she looked at me and she said, I'd rather you be a heroin addict or in prison than to be a homosexual. And that stung, but I also knew, my mom is frail mentally. And so I comforted her. And she had questions. So, do you want to be a girl? I go, no, I don't. I like being a boy, and I like other boys. She wanted me to go to counseling. I went to a psychiatrist with her to please her, and remember, this is in the 1970, right? So at that time, psychiatry and women were, this was the psychiatrist that she would see. And he gave me a test that was like the Minneapolis something or other, and it graphs your energy. And he said, you have all of this female energy, so I want to prescribe a drug for you. It's called Thorazine. And I was like, well, I've never heard of that. And, and he goes, no, this will help balance your energy, whatever. I said, okay, and I guess. And my mom said, yeah, let's go get that prescription. I said, wait, you know what, Mom? I had a best friend, Terry, who I had come out with in high school. And his mom, Betty, was a nurse. And Betty and my mom both knew at that point that Terry and I were gay. I said, Mom, why don't we ask Betty, Terry's mom? Let's trust her judgment. And she told my mother, I would rather, of course, I'd rather have Joey and Terry be straight, but if they have to be on that drug, no. She said, that is a drug that they give to the violently, criminally ill. It zones out your brain. And my mom said, okay, that's good enough for me. So she realized, I'm not going to change. And then we went through a process over about a year where, she was curious, and she loved my friends. So with each week or month that would go by, I'd say, Mom, well, my friend Eddie, like, him too? Oh my gosh, like, yeah. And she goes, well, Joey, how do you know when people are gay? I go, Mom, gaydar. And she's like, ¿Cómo que gaydar? What are you talking about? Like, right? And I said, Mom, sometimes you'll look at someone and they'll look just a little bit longer than usual, or there's a twinkle in their eye. And she's like, I don't understand. I said, you will. And so we go out to eat. We're at a restaurant, and the waiter would come and take our order. And, and I don't mean this, but I guess there were a lot of men that were kind of interested in me back then. I was sort of, handsome or something. And I'd say, Mom, the waiter. What do you mean the waiter? How do you know? I go, Mom, I could tell. You just watched whatever. And so she started to learn about the gay world that I was involved in. And she ended up loving my friends, and my friends would do her hair and, whatever. And she came to accept in a very, very positive way. My father, when I was 23, I hadn't seen my dad in 10 years, and I knew that he was living in Arizona. I was going to go visit my relatives, his sisters, my tias. And I also knew that there's a possibility that they would say, are you interested in seeing your father? I think they thought that because he hadn't been around, I would probably say no, that I was mad or something. I said, sure, I'd love to see my dad. I had no ill feelings towards him. He was an artist. I was an artist. He gave me art. My aunt said, oh my God, he's waiting by the phone. He's going to come over right now. So he came in his truck. He said, I need to take you. Let's go talk. And we went driving. He just apologized for having not been there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, okay, great. I go, Dad, but before we go on with this conversation, there's something I need to tell you. And he said, what's that? And I said, I'm gay. And mind you, my dad was an ex-Marine, very proud of his service. And he looked at me, he says, really? He goes, I thought you were. And I recognized at that moment, he was a lot smarter and more sensitive than I had ever anticipated and thought of. And that he knew that the sensitive child who was with the coloring books and doing art with him, I was not out there playing football with the other neighbor kids and stuff. And he said, I just have one question for you. I said, what's that? Have you ever let anyone bully you and call you names or push you around because you're gay? I said, no, I don't. I said, I'm very, in fact, if anything, I said, I'm very out and open and blah, blah. He says, good. Don't you ever let anyone put you down. You are valuable for who you are. And I was like, that's my dad. So, and then, of course, it was high school, which...
never good for anyone.
No. And in my sophomore year, I came out at our retreat. I went to Cathedral High School, Catholic boys' school, which... Mia went to as well, but a few years before me. And I came out to everyone in the class, in the school, in my class. And what was surprising to me was that a lot of the guys that I thought were my friends were you know what, you're a faggot, you're a puto, blah, 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 blah. And we always knew it, blah, blah, whatever. And I was like, well, you know what? Bye, I'll see ya. And then there were these other guys, the hardcore cholos, gangbangers, whatever, that were at Cathedral. They were 3.8 grade point average, but they were hardcore. And they were like, Joe, you know what? Orale. You have my respect, dude. You're really... It really shifted my idea of how people could perceive me. But anyway, that's the 3 of the coming outs.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Now, yeah. Thank you. A big part of all 3 of your histories has been, just being in the context of history of, the AIDS crisis, even, the Huelga movements, the Vietnam War, like just major points of our American history, but then also so interesting to our queer history. So Phill, obviously, I would love to hear you talk about like when you first started getting involved with your advocacy work, and obviously as well, like, you being in your community and how that became a huge part of like knowing who you were as an advocate, as an activist.
Actually, I think that my story really is a story about the importance of intersectionality. Like I said, I'm from Chicago. My mother was very, very active in Black politics in Chicago. My parents were a part of that northern migration, and so I was always acutely aware of the issues around marginalized folks from the lens of race. And when I came out, which was like right before the AIDS pandemic, and I knew that, my mother used to talk about, you have to leave the world, the price of the ticket is you have to leave the world better than you find it, And so my involvement in LGBTQ plus issues back then, it was just the L and the G, and there were conflicts around whether or not there were conflicts between the L and the G back then. But I knew that my first organization I was involved in was Black and White Men Together, and because my first partner was white, and we were just trying to find a safe space to build our relationship. And so that was the first organization I was involved in. And then the AIDS epidemic began, and I saw these things happening with my family, my friends actually, and I thought, well, I have to do something. And that was connected back to my mother's activism and the work that she did around making sure that Black people were treated fairly. And I realized that wherever you are, that's where you start. And that's how I got involved in LGBTQ work and the whole notion of bringing your whole self into spaces. So if I was going to be involved in LGBTQI work, then absolutely that work had to include people of color, and so that got me involved in kind of the connection between my Blackness, and my sexual orientation. And since my parents had talked about my belongings, then I felt very strongly that no one could take away my racial community either. And so I began to center my queer work in Black spaces, and at the same time center my Black work in queer spaces, and kind of taking your whole self into spaces, I think was basically the way I maneuvered through, LGBTQ communities, the HIV/AIDS space, Black spaces, most of my activism in the HIV/AIDS space was actually about getting Black communities to take ownership of the HIV/AIDS pandemic. So that was like talking to churches about, this is your issue. This is not a charity case. This is not about you helping someone else. This is about you helping yourselves. And Black media and civil rights organizations, because these are all organizations that I grew up in. They were my organizations. And this was an issue that was impacting me. And so they had an obligation to respond to that. And so holding on to that was a critical part of, and it continues to be a critical part of the work that I do.
Did you feel at the time that you were kind of the first, or, because you founded quite a few groups, was it one of those things where you were like, well, someone has to do this, and push to it, and then you started to find more people following you or just following your example in that time period?
Well, I definitely felt like someone had to do it, but it wasn't for me, it wasn't kind of a debate particularly. It needs to be done. There's a great quote by Elizabeth Taylor about her involvement in HIV and AIDS that I love. It's one of my favorite quotes of hers, where she said she was looking around and she saw all these things happening, and nobody was doing anything. And so she said to herself, "Bitch, do something." I love that quote. and I think I didn't hear that quote until later in life, but it certainly reflects the way I always think about these things,
That's amazing. We need more of that. Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. Mia?
Oh, I think that everything we do is around organizing other people. I always start with Frederick Douglass, who said that when he fought against slavery, it was for himself. When he fought against racial discrimination, it was for his people. But when he fought for the rights of women, he found some nobility there. He was defining what it meant to be an ally. In a context and in a world where no minority movement succeeds without the support of allies, he had his ideas in the right place, that you recognize the justice in another community's cause, and you stand up for that community. Because minority communities should not have to stand alone, because if they do, they will not succeed in the way that they need to forge a place for themselves in the mainstream of society where they've been excluded. It takes the support, the recognition, and the energy of allies. In this movement that we're all a part of, which includes the LGBT community, is so important right now because the rights of transgender children and the adults who support them, their parents, are under fire and under attack from the Republican right wing. And I know I'm jeopardizing the nonprofit status of this here library, but I'm going to call out those people for what they are. They are attacking the most minuscule minority for their political advantage. And they do this all the time, and they do it with queer people all the time, and it's part of our history. But understanding that we are all part of a much larger movement, a movement that has been powered by the struggle for Black liberation. It's called the Civil Rights Movement. And the face of it today is Black Lives Matter. Martin Luther King, if he was alive today, would be in the vanguard of those marches, those movements, and those speeches, because that is unfinished business. And it has powered this movement and included all of us, every minority community, the gay community, the women's community. Talk about a group that is under fire that we need to stand up for. Frederick Douglass recognizes that from how many different years ago, from that movement. Understanding this, Dobbs is the law of the land. The subjugation of women is going on in this country, in a free country. This ain't Afghanistan. We can stand up for the rights of women, for the bodily autonomy of women, because when you do that, you stand up for transgender people, for their right to bodily autonomy, and making sure that the decisions about their bodies and their futures are made by them and their doctors. So it is a huge, large problem, and that we have to get up and moving, because the threat against all of us is represented and personified in these attacks against individual parts of us in particular the transgender community. And I say that now as a member of that community, because if I don't say something right now, I feel like I will have let them down. I will let them down. I'm up here, I got this voice, I got this microphone. I better say something. If I see something that's wrong, if I see some injustice, I better practice what I preach. Get out here and say what I think I need to say, speak the truth. Thank you kindly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mia. For me as a queer youth in LA, I feel, first of all, I feel very fortunate. Over the years, I have thought to myself, I'm so glad I was born and raised in LA, as was my mother. I'm second generation. So I'm very pocho. I don't speak Spanish very well. But, that I had access to Metropolitan Community Church. I had access to gay youth groups. I was on the Speakers Bureau of the Gay Community Center. And there were about 4 times when, at the time I was 18, where a high school, usually a very progressive thinking and maybe closeted teacher would say to their class, usually a psychology class, we want to invite a homosexual to come and speak to us. And they would call us up, and the community center would say, hey, we're not going to send some old guy in his 40s. We'll send you because you're 18 and you can speak to the youth. I'd say, okay, great. And I would go in, and usually there was a young woman with me speaking a lesbian viewpoint. And I'd walk in the class, the teacher would say, okay, for all of you who did not get written permission from your parents, you're excused to the library. And about half the class would get up and go. And I realized at that moment, my God, they're so fearful of what I might say, or they're I don't know, they're scared. There was one classroom where there was a parent who monitored the class. She was sitting there with curlers in her hair and just her body language was like this. The first thing I would do is I would go up to the chalkboard and I'd put the phone number of the Gay Community Center and say, this is the phone number of the Gay Community Center. I said, chances are that, that 1 in 10 people are homosexual. There's about 20 of you in the class. So if somebody wants to, please memorize the number and you can call and get, follow up with, exploring that if you like. But I also recognized at that point, my God, their fear gives me power. I mean, I didn't think there was anything that I was going to say that was going to be so outrageous or bad, but obviously it was. Then, as a Chicano, I became very aware that within the gay community, the gay community, especially in the 70s, was a reflection of the general culture. The general culture is, fairly racist and has been. And it came as an eye-opener for me. Yeah, I guess, gay people are just like everyone else. Right? So I became very interested in wanting to explore my Latino, Chicano queerness, and I did that through my art. One year in marching for the Gay Pride Parade, I made up T-shirts. I had them printed up at Sears and Roebuck. But I had one that said faggot, and I wore it. And for my cousin and her partner, I had one that said dyke and one that said lesbian. And they were a hit when we were marching down, down Hollywood Boulevard at that time. And then the next year I said, but you know what? I need to make this about Chicanos. So I did a maricon T-shirt. But I asked my friends who wanted to do them. There were about 12 of us. And I hand wrote them in sort of cholo writing on very, very stylish light yellow T-shirts. And we marched with maricon and La Flora T-shirts. And I remember at that time thinking, this is for 2 audiences. First of all, for the white gay audiences here and allies, letting them know that we are here, as Chicanos, as Latinos, as lesbians, right? But it was also for the Chicano community, the Latino community, that we are here and we're not going anywhere. And that's always been, my strategy in my art making. For those that aren't aware, the last few years, my art career has really taken off. I'm going to say this is going to sound corny. It's like a dream come true. I never thought I was ever going to be able to say those words because I didn't know what it meant. Now I know what it means. So if you all are interested, I'm going to do a plug.
Please.
The Made in LA biennial at the Hammer just opened, and it is there till the end of the year. It's the largest biennial with 39 artists. It's the most LGBTQ, Latinx, people of color, artists of color, trans. It's a fantastic assemblage of art, and I encourage everyone to go see it. And I'll also just say I'm especially honored and proud that the banners for it, if you see the banners and up and down Olympic Boulevard or Beverly Boulevard or wherever, the banners advertising it the curators chose to use images of my paintings. And there's my sister who she died 11 years ago from a very rare form of cancer. That was such a mind fuck to me, because I was supposed to die. I was supposed to die from AIDS. My younger sister was not supposed to die. My mother was not supposed to die. And instead, I've outlived them. And so I'm very grateful. And I know every time I'm driving down the street and I see that banner, I know that she's, screaming her delight. She's supporting me. So, but if anyone looks up my art, you'll always see the intersectionality of being gay and Chicano.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
One of the things that I wanted to say, around who we have to be, is to understand that oppression is of a whole cloth. You really can't cut out the part of it that offends you and wrap yourself in that cloth, because the threads go throughout it. And if we're interested in justice, it can't just be just us. That we really have to be committed to justice, and that, as Martin Luther King said, none of us are free until all of us are free, and an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the work of Pat Parker, but Pat Parker is probably my favorite poet, and she is, her poetry actually taught me how to be an activist. And given the time and the space that we're in now, and kind of the folks that are under attack, and I know that we're probably coming close to the end.
Yeah, but I think this would be a great wrapper-upper.
Exactly. So Pat wrote, "Boots are being polished, trumpeters clear their horns, chains and locks forged, the crusades has begun. Once again, flags of Christ are unfurled in the dawn, and cries of soul saviors sing apocalyptic on airwaves. Citizens, good citizens all, parade in voting booths, and in self-righteous sanctity, X away our right to life."
I think we can sit with that for a
I
moment.
do not believe, as some, that the vote is an end. I fear even more it is just the beginning. So I must look to you and assess and ask the question, where will you be when they come? They will not come a mob rolling through the streets, but quietly and quickly move into our homes and remove the evil, the queerness, the faggotry, the perverse from their midst. They will not come clothed in brown and swastika or bearing chests heavy with gleaming crosses. The time and need for ruses are over. And they will not come, and they will come. And it won't matter if you're a homosexual, not a faggot, lesbian, not a dyke, gay, not queer. It won't matter if you own your business, have a good job, or are on SSI. It won't matter if you're black, Chicano, Native American, Asian, or white. They will come in business suits to buy our homes and bring bodies to fill our jobs. They will come in robes to rehabilitate and white coats to subjugate. And where will you be when they come? Where will we all be when they come? And they will come. It won't matter if you're from New York or Los Angeles, Galveston or Sioux Falls. It won't matter if you're butch or femme, not into roles, monogamous, not monogamous. It won't matter if you're Catholic, Baptist, atheist, Jewish, or MCC. They will come. They will come to the cities and to the land. They will come from. They will come to the cities and to the land, to your front rooms and your closets. And where will you be when they come? I would argue they've come. And I think for each and every one of us, we need to understand that every time a trans person is attacked, that's them coming. You know, every time they pass another law limiting reproductive rights of women, they are coming. Every time they attack a trans family, and take away the right, for someone to have an honest conversation with their doctor and deny people medical care. Every time they attack the Voters' Rights Act, that's them coming, and we should not be confused about where it is, what it is, or and where it is. And so all of these issues, we have to be on the streets. We have to be on the front line. We have to be in the voting booths. We have to be there because every one of those attacks is an attack on us.
Thank you. As we're wrapping up, I mean, one of the things that I know we're short on time, but obviously I'm a younger person, and it does seem like we've stepped back and continuously stepped back in so many ways. And I hear stories of people saying, well, it's always been hard. It's always been this or that. But I think that's not an excuse, right? Like, no matter how much has been experienced or how much progress or lack of progress has been made, people still need to show up. And part of that too is celebrating our victories. And, I feel very firmly that it's both, boots on the ground and also like our own pleasures. And so when it comes to being part of our truths, that also means, being grateful for our communities, for these spaces, for even having a platform to speak. And that needs to continue to be promoted in so many ways. And I think there's always, people who are hesitant because it's like, I don't know what I can do. This feels so much bigger than me. I've donated my money, I've gone to the protests, etc. But it's just like a continuous thing of showing up and just talking to people and feeling that human connection, which I know you're talking about before, is like, it's so easy to lose that human connection in the echo chambers of online and etc. So, I mean, it's hard because I know we're like short on time, but, where do we go from here, right? That's like, I think, a big question, especially for younger queer people, of like looking to people who have already been through so many fights, of asking, how do we keep going, or what next? What do we need to do as young people and, as maybe, future ancestors in that sense of like one day we'll be the elders. And, obviously things like this is amazing because we're finding, mentors when a lot of us didn't have mentors beforehand. And I just wonder, like, I asked you this as someone who's younger, like, where do we go from here? What do we do next? And it's okay to not have like an immediate answer. I mean, obviously one of the things is showing up and, being with people, but it is exhausting. Obviously, like the last couple of years have felt like a decade, and it only feels to be ramping up. And obviously, we're all aware of the news of it's hard not to feel like incredibly depressed. And how do we, kind of pull ourselves up?
Well, I think that the answer is that you show up. And I think that the other thing is that's the plan. That's their plan. No, they need for us to feel depressed. They need for us to feel powerless. That's what oppressors do. That's what perpetrators do. And we need to understand that that's their plan, and we need to not fall into that plan. So we need to show up and show up and show up. The point is not to be afraid. The point is to act anyway.
I think that we have to get involved in mass movement. I mean, there is an election coming up, and as difficult as it is to find consensus on some of these issues, we have to beat back the right wing, the fascist challenge to democracy that's being mounted in certain places all over this country. I don't feel like we can turn away from that battle. That is where we have to mobilize, we have to speak, we have to march, we have to get on the media, we have to speak to everybody who will listen to us and avoid the people that are working off of conspiracy theories and listening to Fox News and listening to a lot of media that the only thing they know is slogans, sound bites, and just nothing, basically. It's supposed to pass for knowledge, but the main thing is this: we have the truth on our side, actually, because we look at facts, we look at science, we don't look at alternative facts, we don't look at the fiction of the right wing. I think it's really important that we actually pose that, poke holes in it, speak to it, speak truth to power. We are a minority community, so we have to raise our voices along with the majority communities, with other communities. It still has to do with coalitions. Every group I work with is multiracial, works with also queer people and women's groups. Every group I work with expands its reach by making sure that it's inclusive of all the different elements, the disparate elements that exist in the community that would benefit from a democratic society, a democratic government. It is a big issue that's coming up with our elections, and I think we can't sit back.
I was thinking, I've been thinking about this a lot. I do a lot of speaking to younger people, students, academics, LGBTQ. One of the reasons being that AIDS wiped out a whole generation of us. And when I was growing up as a teen, I had elders, I had mentors. I learned from the old dykes, the old queens, the adults, seniors who would inform me about history, what we did, what we didn't do, what used to be, or where the gay bars are, whatever. It was an enlightening, particularly in Los Angeles. In the 70s, the feminist mantra, which I think you mentioned earlier, the personal is political, is something I've always applied in my art making. But I recognize now, in 2023, you can reverse that. And the political is personal. And it's up to every individual person, wherever they can, to fight back, push back, speak out, whether in your family, in your, in your networks, social media, etc. Because it is a war, and I feel like we can win the war if we want to. I just also want to say something that to Phill. Phill may not realize this. Phill and I met back in 1986 when we were both on the Stop AIDS Quarantine Committee to fight Proposition 64. There's a button up here. That was the Lyndon LaRouche proposition on the California ballot that called for quarantining all people with HIV. Okay, it was the statistics showed that the polls showed that it was going to pass. People were so fearful, and there was stigma. There was conversation going on by politicians about reopening Manzanar to place all the people with HIV and AIDS. That was how fucking scary it was. I was terrified. I was horrified. But Chris's partner, Phil's partner, Chris Brownlee, was out and open. He was a white man, but he was so passionate and powerful. And I credit Chris, I don't know if you know this, I credit him, his talking to me as a young queer man, with giving me the courage to be able to take on the battle and the fight with not just AIDS, but also advocacy around all of the issues that we just talked about. So I just wanted to point that out to you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Sure. I'll take them both. I think that's good for, I mean, we could keep talking, but this is the end. And I just want to again thank the three of you so much for being here. You can watch full interviews on Outwords to really get their full stories, but please, please, please continue supporting their work. Phill, you have a festival coming up, right? I think I saw, or maybe not. Dance for Life. Yeah. And made in LA. Mia, is there anything that, we can kind of follow you on, or?
I just want to say one pitch for PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. I've learned something in my advocacy that the people who love us are more powerful and persuasive in the public forum than any one of us could be for ourselves. I've learned that in the media. The stories I'm hearing about both your parents and the support that they gave, that, when it's a public demonstration, a proclamation, is hugely powerful, and more powerful, like I said, than any one of us could ever be for ourselves, for the community. Our parents, the people that love us, there's something really powerful about that message. And I'm just saying, I want you to support PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, because they have been making a difference out there. I've been watching this, I've been in these campaigns for, Mason knows, I'm 50 years, 60 years, it's a long time. And I've seen the people that make a difference and the people that are making a difference constantly. And I've witnessed this. And it's a phenomenon that I would never have been able to identify before, but it's out there and it's amazing and it's really powerful. PFLAG.
Thank you.
So yes, the festival you're talking about is Dance for Life for Health Equity, and it is a dance festival. We just finished our second festival. The third one will be in 2024. So keep your eyes open for it. It's at the festival is at the Nate Holden Performing Arts Center on Washington. And the whole idea is to bring art and music and dance together to address advocacy issues and to unite artists in political advocacy, particularly around health equity. So that's kind of the work that I'm doing these days. But I want to end with the fundamental question is that all movements begin with one person. No, and all victories depend on one person. And so when you think that you're just one person, that's true, you are one person, but you can be that person. And we should never, ever forget that.
Thank you. Thank you to our three panelists, Joey, Mia, and Phill. Thank you for your time, your work, and continuing to put your voices out there. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here.